Yes, my name is Marilyn Castriota, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager with Kestrel Land Trust based in Amherst. As many of you know, the mission of Kestrel Land Trust is to conserve and care for forests, farms, and riverways in the Connecticut River Valley of Western Massachusetts, and doing so while nurturing an enduring love of the land. Tonight's event is the first in our 2024 online speaker series, Conservation Action for Biodiversity. While we are fortunate that our region's forests and wetlands provide habitat for a wide range of animals, we live in an era when wildlife habitats are increasingly threatened by development, pollution, and fragmentation. One of the best ways to support biodiversity is by conserving the lands and waters that provide wildlife homes, food sources, breeding grounds, and conditions conducive to thriving. In this speaker series, we will learn what actions are being taken to boost biodiversity, beginning tonight with black bears. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dave Wattles. Dave has been the black bear and fur-bearer biologist with the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife since 2016. He became involved with black bear work as a graduate student and postdoc here in Western Mass while attending UMass Amherst. Welcome, Dave, and now turning it over to you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me tonight. This presentation is going to provide initially some information on black bear ecology, biology, and how that informs their behavior, their actions, what we're doing for research, and what's the status of the population, what we're doing to monitor that, other research initiatives we have, and then finally talking about coexisting with bears. So what you as individuals, neighborhoods, communities can do to help bears and to prevent conflict with bears. So we are talking about black bears. Black bears are the only bears that are found in the eastern United States, but we do get the question, are we talking about black bears, brown bears? It is black bears. Adult males can be quite large. It's very common to have adult males over 450 pounds, with the exception of the mating season when they're actively enlarging their home range, moving all over, trying to find females that are receptive to mate with. They're solitary. Going back to their size, they can reach a size of 450 pounds at a very young age. We actively trap bears for research projects. And if we catch a young bear, or if we handle a bear as a 1-year-old with her mother, with its mother, and we ear tag them, if those bears are involved in a vehicle collision, they're taken in a hunting season here or another state, 2-3 years later, they can be 300 to 400 pounds. So the growth capacity of males is really extraordinary. Adult females can weigh anywhere from 140 to 300 pounds. That range is due to differences in where they're living in the state and the foods that they're feeding on. Bears that are primarily living in entirely natural areas and feeding on natural foods are going to be in the 140 to 160 pounds range, and this is mature females. Whereas bears in suburban areas can easily be 250 pounds, and we have had bears that have been over 300 pounds for female. Those are exceptionally large females. I'm going to talk quickly about the 2-year life cycle of female black bears in their cubs. Females give birth to cubs every other year, and we'll start with when their 1-year-old cubs are dispersing. So typically in April and May, those cubs that have been with their mom for just over a year disperse. They're on their own for the rest of their life. And that just takes place in April, May, just prior to the breeding season. The breeding season for bears in Massachusetts peaks in June. It can take place from anywhere from late March to April through the summer, but in reality, it peaks in June. When a female is mated, her eggs are fertilized. They begin to develop, but then they pause. Those eggs don't implant in the uterus, and so the pregnancy does not continue. This is called delayed implantation. Bears are one of a few species that do this. And for the rest of the summer, that female is going to be alone now. Since her cubs dispersed, she's now basically just out being a bear, finding food, and trying to pack on the reserves she needs to give birth to those cubs and then to nourish them with her milk in the den. Pregnant females are going to den pretty much like clockwork right about November 1st. The very last part of October, the beginning of November, about half of our females are entering the den. This is when that egg implants now in the uterine wall and the pregnancy actually begins to develop. So fetal development is relatively short and the cubs are born basically right about now. Basically mid-January to the beginning of February is when they're giving birth. And now she's going to remain in her den for the rest of the winter, and those cubs are growing, getting stronger based just on her milk that she's getting from her fat reserves. Generally speaking, those females are going to emerge around April 1st. And for the rest of the year, she is moving around. She's showing them how to find foods, how to navigate the landscape, and basically how to be a bear. The cubs are weaned by late summer, and typically they're going to enter at a later stage than those females with newborn or that are pregnant and expecting newborn cubs. So sometime later in November into December, and as we'll talk about a little bit later, sometimes not at all. Again, those cubs as 1-year-olds den with their mother, and they tend to emerge earlier as well. So mid-February to mid-March, they're going to emerge from the den. In the spring, they're going to be active with their mother. She's showing them now where to find spring foods that they may not have been feeding on the previous year. Again, they're dispersing just prior to the mating season that begins in June. A bit on black bear diet. Black bears are opportunistic omnivores, meaning omnivores, they eat both plants and animal matter. But 99% of their diet is actually plant-based. And they're opportunistic, meaning they will eat just about anything. In spring, there's actually not a lot of food for a bear. Because they're primarily vegetarians, they're eating the first emergent vegetation that comes up. So grasses, sedges, shoots, as they're lush in that soft vegetation in the spring. Skunk cabbage is an extremely important spring food, both after it's leafed out, but also as it's just the little tuber-like root in wetlands, very important. They'll eat leftover nuts, acorns, beech nuts, hickory nuts that fell the previous fall and overwintered, and they will opportunistically prey on deer fawns. They're not a true predator where they're chasing down prey, but deer, when they're first born, basically the fawns hide in thick vegetation, those kind of things. Bears, with their incredible sense of smell, can find fawns and will opportunistically prey on them when they encounter them. Generally speaking, as I said, food is scarce, so we do tend to see very high use of human-associated foods in the spring, the big one obviously being bird feeders. And throughout the year, bear habitat use in the types of forests and habitat that they're going to be using is where they can find food seasonally. And so in the spring, we tend to see that it is wetland dominated, particularly those females with cubs. As the season progresses into summer, bears are going to take advantage of different foods as they become available. Big sources of food for bears in the summer are insects, colonial insects like ants, bees, wasps, their nests, the insects themselves, their larvae, honey. They'll dig those out of stumps and rotten logs out of the ground and eat them. What we call soft mass, so berries of all different types and fruits are extremely important summer foods. So right from the beginning, strawberries into blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, black cherries, grapes, all very important foods for bear. And unfortunately, they will also take advantage of crops, the two big ones being apples and corn, and they can do an extremely large amount of damage in orchards, but particularly in cornfields, where a bear will just go out in the field and they'll just flatten large sections of corn and gorge themselves on the corn. In the summer, bears are typically found in the places where these foods are provided, so upland forests, logged areas. Logged areas both have, stumps that are rotting, logs on the ground where those insects can nest, but they're also great places to find berries. Wetlands and fields and orchards are places you'll find them. In the fall, prior to hibernation, bears enter what's called a state of hyperphagia. It's basically a compulsion for them to eat as much as possible to put on the fat reserves that they need to survive hibernation when they won't be eating at all. In fall, their diets again consist of crops, but hard mass. So this is now the nuts from our nutting trees are a critical food source for bears. So acorns, beech nuts are the two favored types of nuts. to a lesser extent hickory nuts as well. And they'll opportunistically scavenge on deer carcasses from the hunting season or other carcasses as well. In the fall, we typically find bears in upland forest, fields, and orchards. We talked about this before with our pregnant females and when they're denning, like I said, the end of October, very beginning of November. All other bears, typically it is later in November and December. And the variability of when these other bears are going to enter the den is really driven by food availability and weather. Not whether or not from the standpoint of it's too cold for a bear to be out there. They can easily survive just as well as any of the other animals that remain active all winter. But if we get deep snow or an ice crust that prevents them from accessing food, they might enter the dens earlier. Typically, if we see that food is scarce, bears might enter the den earlier, or food is abundant, they might den later or not at all. But these things can vary widely, and you can have the exact opposite occurring where food is scarce, bears actually remain active for longer because they need to still find food, or vice versa. They remain in the den for 4 to 5 months without food or water and with no excretion of waste. Why do they hibernate? It's an adaptation that they have for dealing with the lack of food available to them in winter. A large animal that's primarily vegetarian, who's not able to digest woody vegetation like deer or moose or rabbits can, basically there's no food available for them in winter. And so what this means, though, is that they have to gain all the weight they need to survive hibernation in those few 6, 7, 8 months that they're active. As a result, bears are evolutionarily adapted to search for calorie-rich foods. And unfortunately, people readily supply those foods around their homes in the terms of bird feeders, unsecured garbage, pet food, compost, and other food sources. And this is the driver of conflict with bears. So this is our current range of bears in Massachusetts. In colonial times, bears were found throughout the state. And our population after European colonization was drastically reduced. We had a small remnant population in the northern Berkshires. This was the result of prior to wildlife agencies existing, bears were hunted throughout the year for food. They were hunted as a pest for agriculture and livestock purposes, for their fur, and basically they were hunted without any regulation to it. Additionally, almost all the forests in Massachusetts and elsewhere in the east were cut down and converted into farmland. So the habitat loss also led to their decline. And basically, the slow expansion of the population is resulting in what we have today. Our bear population is continuing to expand. The gray areas we have here are where we definitely have active reproductive females occurring. Likely, there are some reproductive females along the edge of this range as well. But typically the brown range, this expanding range, is where we see young males kind of wandering through, dispersing out of our established range and moving into eastern Mass. Every year in recent years, we're having more and more bears showing up in southeast Mass. You've probably seen that in the media this past summer, multiple bears moving through those areas. But in reality, it's 1 or 2 bears that's accounting for all those reports all throughout southeast Mass. The expansion of our established range is actually rather slow. While young males will disperse potentially 50 to 100 miles out of their mom's territory when they leave, young females tend to use a portion of their mother's range. And so every time our bear range butts up into major highways like this, or in the past with the Connecticut River, that slows the expansion. It takes a female jumping over that boundary, establishing herself on the other side, beginning to produce cubs when the population is going to start growing there. So where our current range boundary is here in Massachusetts, you've got the city of Worcester right here, all these major highways that are slowing that real expansion of our range further to the east. One of the best ways to look at the expansion of our black bear population in the state, which is relatively speaking fairly recent, is going back and looking at where bears were taken in our hunting season in the past. You only have to go back to 1980, where we took 10 bears in the entire state in our hunting season. And it is in that area where we had the remnant population. By 1990, our population had already expanded throughout the northern Berkshires, crossed the Connecticut River at this point, and we're beginning to move into Connecticut as well. By 2000, you can see basically throughout the Western Mass, we're now starting to regularly take bears in our hunting season. You can see in individual towns where we're taking 4, 5, 6 bears in every year. And this is an indication of, how rapidly the bear population was expanding, as well as increasing in density. Shortly after this, we began taking bears for the first time east of the Connecticut River. And you see basically now by 2010, we're starting to see what happened 30 years prior in Western Mass, now starting to unfold in Central Mass as well. And if we progress this along, you can see this pattern continuing. From about 2015 to 2016, we started taking very large numbers of bears along the Connecticut border. As I mentioned, probably about 25 to 30 years ago, our bears moved into Connecticut. Connecticut does not have a hunting season, and so their population is growing essentially unchecked, and we now have very high densities along our Connecticut border. A brief note about Connecticut and not having a hunting season as well. Connecticut experiences enormous levels of conflict that we don't in Massachusetts. Every year for the past half dozen, they've been having 50, 60, 70 home entries by bears in their state, where maybe we have 1 or 2 in Massachusetts in any given year. Additionally, there have been multiple people that have been attacked by black bears in Connecticut in recent years. And so, this is one of the benefits of having a hunting season, is that it probably removes some of these bolder, more aggressive bears that are causing some of these serious forms of conflict that Connecticut is experiencing. But as I said, this pattern is continuing, and our bears are continuing to expand to the east, as we see here. Another way we can see where we have bears in the state and the relative densities is looking at calls to the environmental police. Being a law enforcement agency, all of their calls are recorded. So I get the data from them, basically their call log of all calls related to bears. And you can see basically matching our established ranges where we tend to have high densities of calls. The higher calls per town tend to be in urban areas that have bears living right in and around those urban areas. And over in these other portions of the state, in the Southeast, for example, again, that could be a single bear that's moving through Southeast Mass that accounts for all those sightings. That's the case up here in the Northeast, where you see 18, 10 sightings in these couple towns. There was a bear last year up in that portion of the state that just generated a lot of calls. Once I get this summer's data, this portion of the state is going to absolutely explode. Dozens and dozens and dozens of phone calls related to those couple bears in that portion of the state. So with these information, we can get ideas that we know our population is expanding, we know it's continuing to expand, but obviously as a biologist responsible for managing the bears, we want more information. Don't get too hung up on what's going on here, but as a biologist, we like to model what's happening with wildlife populations. And to do that, we need information on what's going on with the population at one time, and a bunch of different biological information to predict what might be happening with the population in the future. And so this is the numbers of bears of different age classes in the population. What are their chances of surviving from one year to the next? What is the cub production that these different age classes of bears, what is cub survival? And so if we have all these pieces of information, we can start to model the population. To get that information, Mass Wildlife has been conducting a collaring study going back to the early 1980s. So every year, our regional biologists are trapping black bears to get new study animals. And we use these types of culvert traps where we have basically, this is 2.5 55-gallon drums welded together. There's a bait bag in the far end of that trap that's connected to a wire that goes along the top of the trap. The bear squeezes in there, pulls the bait bag, the door closes behind it. And even this large male that you see here will squeeze himself into that trap to get the food reward that's in there. Once we have the bear in the trap, we will tranquilize or immobilize it using basically a tranquilizer in a syringe at the end of a pole. Once the bear is immobilized, we'll pull it out of the trap, as you see in the lower left, and we can then work it up. You can also see on the right, occasionally we will take advantage of a situation where there is a female with cubs, for example, in a more developed location, a spot where we might not trap, but she's in a tree somewhere. We can potentially go out, dart her with a dart gun, immobilize her, get a collar on her in a place that we wouldn't. And you can see this police officer was clearly enjoying participating in this activity. Once the bear is immobilized, we'll obviously assess their condition, determine what sex it is. All of the bears get individually numbered ear tags, and this is what allows us to identify if that bear is taken in the hunting season 4 years from now. You get information on how long it survives from capture. It's involved in a vehicle collision somewhere, what have you. And then our females are getting tracking collars. These collars here that they're working on are GPS collars, and that's what most of our new females are getting. Basically, it has a unit on it that takes a GPS fix every 45 minutes. So when the bears are out of the den, we know with great detail where they're moving, what types of habitats they're using, how often they're in backyards versus natural places, when they're crossing roads, how frequently, where. So we're getting a really clear picture of how our bears are using and navigating the modern landscape of Massachusetts. We'll also, some of our bears also just have a conventional collar, and after they use a GPS collar for a couple of years, they'll be converted into just a conventional collar that just puts out a pulsing frequency, and we can tune a receiver to that frequency and locate the bear. And each winter, we walk in on their dens, and so I'm doing this work right now where we're going and we're identifying where the dens are, and we're going in and capturing the bears. If one of the bears had died between the time either last winter or if it was trapped in the spring, the signal from that collar changes, and it lets us know that that collar hasn't moved for a while. And so then we'll try to follow it, walk in on the collar, determine if we can what the cause of mortality is for that bear. And again, we're now getting information on the bear's survival. Here are some different types of den. They can be in rock caves, but it's not a super common type of den just because that habitat type isn't very common in Massachusetts. Quite often in hollow trees, either up in the tree or a hollow at the base of the tree. Overturned trees, like next to the root mass and underneath the logs, they'll make a little nest. They can just be in dense brush, a log pile. Some bears just literally build a big bird's nest on the ground out of leaves or pine needles, and they're completely exposed to the elements. And it's fairly common for bears to den just like that. Or they'll make a burrow in the ground. And we really like it when they're in these burrow dens or the hollow tree dens, the cave dens. It greatly increases our chances of capturing them. Because bears aren't true hibernators. They're basically just taking a nap. And so they can wake up and become 100% active in an instant. So if when we're walking in on the dens, if we're breaking sticks, we're talking, we're making noises, that bear's going to hear us coming. It's going to get up and leave, and we're not going to be successful. So we try to sneak in as quietly as possible. Again, we try to use that jab pole. We have a 12-foot long jab pole we can use to administer the tranquilizer while she's still sleeping. She goes to sleep right in the den, and we can work her up. Once we pull her out of the den, we'll assess her condition, look for any injuries, anything like that. And then we can also refit and replace her collar as needed to replace the batteries. As I said, half of our females are giving birth to cubs every winter. And so the cubs, when we do this work, are large enough to be handled, but also not too large that we can't handle them. And so we'll determine how many cubs they give birth to, the sex of the cubs, we'll weigh the cubs to assess their condition. Once we're done with this work, and that's giving us that key piece of information, how many cubs are bears of different age, different areas producing. Once we're done working them up, we'll put mom back in the den. We tuck the cubs in right next to her, cover the entrance to the den up with some pine boughs or some hemlock boughs to just provide a little cover. Within an hour or so, she'll wake up, really won't know anything happened, and she'll spend the rest of the winter in the den with her cubs. We'll repeat this process the next year, and if we can successfully immobilize mom, we can then one at a time now immobilize the now 1-year-old bears. In this way, we can see, okay, she gave birth to 3 cubs 1 year. The next year, she has 2 cubs. You obviously have information there on cub survival to 1 year of age. All the cubs are given ear tags, again, so you can monitor them if they're killed or if they're captured again in the future. And some of the young females actually get expandable collars at this time. These are collars that will accommodate their growth. In this way, we can monitor them from age 1. They'll den by themselves as 2-year-olds, and at that point, they'll get a full-size collar. And so by doing this, and then they're rolled into our study. And so from this, we can learn about their survival from a cub straight through their entire life, their reproductive potential all that long. So you can get really detailed information, particularly as we've been doing this work for such a long time, really good information and an idea about what's happening with our bear population. Here's an example of one of the families we collared. The bear on the right, obviously, is mom, and she's actually the offspring of a previously collared female. And so we know information about, when her mother was eventually killed. She eventually was killed as a 7-year-old bear, having given birth to 2 litters. You can see her male yearling in the center, and her female yearling on the left, who has an expandable collar. I know, for example, that female yearling on the left gave birth to her first litter last year as a 3-year-old. She's denned again down in Spencer this year. And there's indications based on when she denned, she may have lost her first litter. So we're treating it as if she did lose her first litter and she's going to have newborn cubs again. And we'll go and capture her in about another month. So again, from doing this for a long time, we have very good information about survival, and we know that our adult females have very high survival rates. If they can survive to about 3 or 4 years of age, they survive at a very high rate. And it's this adult female survival rate that has the largest impact on whether or not our population is growing, as it is, stable, or if it's declining. We know when they give birth to their first litter of cubs, 3 to 4, typically earlier in developed areas where their natural diet is being supplemented by human associated foods. And in reality now, almost all of our bears are giving birth at age 3. It's pretty much now it's very, very rare that we go in on a 3-year-old bear that doesn't have her first litter of cubs. We know, for example, differences in litter size from that first litter. It's typically 1 or 2 small cubs to potentially 2, 3, 4 larger and more robust cubs. We know differences on the survival of those cubs. Survival of the first litter often isn't very good for a couple of reasons. These cubs on the right are two dens that we did in back-to-back days. You can see that cub on top that was from a first litter. It's very small still and can fit in my hand, versus the cubs from a mature female are basically little brawlers that you can barely hold on to. We also know that, those young females typically don't have as good body conditions, so they can lose their milk more quickly and not provide as much milk for their cubs. And they just also don't know how to be good moms. Mature females are basically going to move into a wetland. In a wetland, they can find skunk cabbage, water, food, and basically not move them up much and not put their cubs in risky situations. The young females are moving around a lot. They're putting their cubs in risky situations, making them expend a lot of energy chasing after her. They're crossing roads, and they might not know how to fend off males during the mating season. So just overall, the survival isn't as good. And we've learned about their causes of mortality. We know that there is very little natural mortality in our bear population. Almost all of it is human associated. So it's our hunting season, it's vehicle collisions, it's nuisance kills by the public are really the predominant factors that are causing mortality in our bear population. And through doing this over time, as I said, we can model the population growth over time. And it's this model which is why you hear us, we've said in the past that we have 4,500 to 5,000 bears in the state. If I were to continue to use this model, it would be telling us that we have 10,000 or more bears in the state. It's a relatively simple model that doesn't take into account all different sources of natural variability. So, I'm not going to say, everyone wants to know exactly how many bears there are in the state. We're pretty confident that there are 4,000 to 5,000 bears in the state, but what we're very confident of is that those survival rates, the reproductive rates that we have now, are very consistent with what we've had historically. That has allowed this growth in the population. That combined with all other factors paint a clear picture that our population is still growing and thriving in Massachusetts. And one of the ways you can see that is just by looking at differences in just the number of bears there are in your area. When I was first at UMass, most of the bears we were collaring and putting GPS collars on were west of the Connecticut River. We started putting bears on the east of the river, and they had enormous home ranges, 5 times the size of what we had in Western Mass, where we had much higher densities of bears. In the short 10 years since that happened, the bear home ranges in eastern Mass, I should say, all these dots, each one of the different colors is from a different bear. So here, for example, is the data from 7 of our collared bears in the Amherst area. And so 10 years ago, we wouldn't have dreamed of having this many bears captured, and they'd use much larger areas if they were there. This isn't even all the bears we have captured. All those yellow circles are now bears that used to have GPS collars that are just now have conventional radio collars. Just this past year, we trapped 3 more bears in this area. And all of these are females, reproductive females. So this isn't males. This isn't the young bears. So this gives you an idea of the high densities of bears that you have now living in your area and the very rapid growth that we have now in our bear population in your area, and that same rapid growth that we're starting to see in Worcester County that's causing our population to push further to the east. So some of the other research that we're doing is actually doing some modeling of this data. So again, here are some example GPS collar data sets. Again, each one of these dots here is where this one bear was, for example, at a different 45-minute period. So, as you're tracking it throughout the year, here's some areas that are close to home. For example, this is the Holyoke Range. This is Westover Air Force Base. And so this bear on the right is using a highly human-dominated landscape. The bear on the left, this is up into Mount Toby, is the large block of habitat here, and then Sunderland down here, an agricultural landscape and how they're moving about. So we did some analyses to see what are the factors that allow bears to move. How are bears moving across these fragmented landscapes that we have? After I left UMass, we had a postdoc that did some really great analyses. She did analyses of all the different factors on the landscape, both natural, so different types of forests, wetlands, and agricultural lands, what have you, and how they affected bear movements. Also, how different types of development, low density residential, high density residential, commercial, different types of roads affected development. You can then, affected bear movements across the landscape. You can then apply those results to the landscape, and this is basically a map of a portion of Massachusetts that's showing bears' ability to move across it. Green areas, your natural areas, have a high probability of bears moving through them. The brown areas, this happens to be greenfield, prohibit bear movement or restrict bear movements on the landscape. And so this gives us an information about how connected the landscape is for bears in Massachusetts. We can then do additional analyses where we basically take all sorts of random locations and we put them on this movement layer that we've created and say, all right, we're going to make these and basically say this is a bear. It has to now move from every single one location to every single other location, moving through the green areas and avoiding the brown areas. And if you do this over and over and over and over again, those movement paths start to coalesce in areas that are good for movement. So for example, these dark green lines are where lots and lots and lots of those simulated movement paths move through the landscape. So that's an indication that these areas are key movement corridors for bears to move across the state. We're now working with Mass DOT, who has been providing the funding for our GPS collars since I was at UMass. So that they can use this data as they're evaluating their construction projects. So for example, if they have a construction project along Route 2, let's say it's over in this area, and they see this data, they're going to say, okay, we know that this area is a key movement corridor for bears, provides connectivity. Can they do something in their roadway design that helps to maintain that connectivity for bears and other wildlife so that our road network aren't as large a source of mortality and aren't as big a barrier to movement of wildlife. So a brief bit about conservation, and to echo Marilyn's comments at the beginning, really one of the biggest things that the public can do to help support our wildlife in Massachusetts is through the conservation of habitat. The recovery of our bear population is the same in that expansion of our bear population is the same thing we've seen with deer, with moose, with bobcat, with fisher, with a whole host of our wildlife species. And it all mostly results to, one, our regulation of the hunting and trapping seasons for those species, but also the recovery of their habitat. And so in a landscape as developed as Massachusetts, our protected lands are critically important to maintain habitat blocks for our wildlife, but also to maintain connectivity. And so all the different polygons you see here are different protected lands in the state. The greens are state forests, state watersheds, wildlife management areas, state-controlled protected habitat. The yellows are areas where the state has paid private citizens to preserve their habitat, both forest and agricultural lands from development, but they're still owned by private properties. The blues are municipal watershed lands, and the reds are private conservation lands. So these are lands that are purchased and managed by Kestrel Land Trust, Mass Audubon, the Nature Conservancy, and they're critical in the network of connected lands we have in Massachusetts. In some cases, protecting critical habitat for a specific region, but you can also see in many places that they provide key linkages between these other large blocks of state-owned land. And so again, supporting your local conservation, land conservation organizations is really critical for helping to preserve the wildlife that we all love in Massachusetts. And you can see that if we again provide those connectivity corridors on here, how frequently they're moving through all these protected habitat patches. I'm going to kind of change pace here and kind of get out of the research and what's going on with our bear population into the other thing that you can do to help our bears, and that's trying to prevent conflict with them. You guys are all obviously very familiar with this area, and we have a lot of bears that we've had collared in this area over the years. Again, I'm going to bring up some of our bear data just to show how much bears are living in and amongst us every single day in Massachusetts. Remember, each one of the clusters that you see of locations is an individual female bear. So basically, you can see that the city of Northampton disappears under bears. And this figure is actually quite dated now. It's from 2017, so there's a lot of bears now that I haven't added to this figure. But even so, you can see how dense the bears are. And again, this is just females. And so just because there's a hole up here where we don't have data, believe it or not, we have data there now. And so what I wanted you to see here is that, bears are in backyards, they're in neighborhoods, they're next to schools, they're next to playgrounds, living amongst us every single day without serious conflict with these animals. But there is conflict. Again, another example, this is Westover Air Force Base, Chicopee, Holyoke, very, very developed locations. And these are females that are giving birth to cubs and raising litters in these places. Closer to home, here is the UMass campus. And so this green bear is actually a bear that is denned on the UMass campus multiple years. She's given birth to newborn cubs on UMass Amherst. You can see how they're moving through neighborhoods. And this is just a small portion of her data. These bears are living in and amongst our neighborhoods in the small blocks of forest. And so as a wildlife manager, I know that this type of habitat configuration is very, very common in Massachusetts, where we have blocks of forest, small and large, interspersed by different types of development, wetland here, all those natural habitats interspersed with human development. My job is to talk to you and talk to others in the community and may try to make you understand that while you're sitting in your house and thinking about the kids playing in the yard, barbecue in the backyard, that the decisions you make around your homes very much determine whether or not this is a situation you have as well, where there's bears living in and amongst your neighborhoods and around your homes. My goal as the primary manager of bears in the state is to have a healthy bear population feeding on natural foods, using natural habitats, and living compatibly with the human population we have in Massachusetts. But I can't do that without your help. It really is critical that I can talk about this, but I really need individuals, neighborhoods, and communities to take action in order to make sure that this is happening. So going back to what we talked about at the beginning and why do bears hibernate? Again, it's because of the lack of food available to them in winter. And the result of this is basically that bears are eating machines when they're active. They're essentially a stomach on legs that is trying to find every single bit of calorie-rich food they can to put on the fat reserves they need to survive winter. This means that bears are going to take advantage of human-associated foods year-round. And this is the root cause of human-bear conflict. It is not that these are bad bears that are doing this. Every single bear is doing this. It's just a bear being a bear and taking advantage of those foods that we're leaving out and about for them. And the biggest one is bird feeders. And I know this is probably going to hit home for a number of you on this talk. but bird feeders, quite frankly, are the bane of my existence and the bane of bears' existence, even though they don't quite know it. And I'll say right now that bird feeders are a fallacy. There is no such thing as a bird feeder. They are wildlife feeders. And you all know this because you despise the squirrels and the chipmunks and things that come and scare your birds off. But they're also turkeys and coyotes uh, and bears are feeding at these bird feeders as well. And, you know, from a bear's perspective, that is thousands of calories in a tube that they can empty. They can go 2 houses down and empty another one, and you're going to refill it the next day. And this is a very, very common situation. You know, how many times have you seen or heard about bears feeding at bird feeders? And you can see on the right, I've actually stolen this from a presentation from our former Connecticut River Valley district manager, but this is a conversation I've had as well, where someone calls you and say, you have to do something about this bear that keeps coming to my yard, and then they send you this photo. And it's like, what don't you get? What do you want me to do? You're feeding the bear. You know, I could come out and I could capture or kill that bear. I'm not going to do that. Believe me, I'm not going to do that. But say I did. You saw the densities of bears that are living in your area. If that bird feeder remains, the next bear, the next bear, the next bear, the next bear, and the next bear is going to do the same thing. I have the bear in the upper left circled. This is one of our young females that we collared as a 1-year-old with her mom in the den. As soon as she left mom, we started getting reports of her. She moved down into South Hadley and Granby, eventually down into Chicopee. She denned right next to Westover Air Force Base on multiple occasions. Immediately getting into bird feeders, causing issues in neighborhoods. And we'll revisit her again later. Each time the bears come to a bird feeder, they're basically being trained that the best place to find food is in your yard, on your deck, and next to your home. So are they going to look for berries and things in the forest? No, they're going to come to your yard to try to find food. They learn these locations and they return time and time and time again. And the problems will not stop if the bird feeders are not removed. In case it's not clear, no bird feeders. People often tell us that, you know, I take the bird feeders in every night. What do you notice about all these pictures? They are during the day. Most of our bears are more active during the day than they are at night. The data from our collars tells us this. So removing the bird feeders at night really does nothing to prevent bears. And a lot of people will say, I don't mind having bears in my yard. I kind of like seeing them. That's great, but your neighbor doesn't. And we'll talk more about other things down the line. The bear here that is feeding at your bird feeder is learning to find food around their homes. They go down the block, they get into someone's chickens, and they get shot for learning to feed in backyards. Bears and garbage, another big issue, both dumpsters and household garbage. For household garbage, we really want people to store their garbage in a secure building like a shed or a well-built shed or a garage. Put it out the morning and pick up, not the day or the night before. I know they come early sometimes, but really, if you don't want wildlife in them, you really have to do this. Put it out to a curb in a can and not just a bag. If you don't have a garage, you don't have a shed, or you know someone who's experiencing that, Florida Fish and Wildlife put together extremely detailed plans to build these kind of garbage can sheds that will prevent bears from accessing your garbage. You do not have to be a handy person to be able to build one of these. These are extraordinarily detailed directions, and we have them available. If you need assistance with this, contact our regional office in Belchertown, and we'd be happy, or me, and we'd be happy to share those plans with you. Dumpsters. Dumpsters are potentially a major issue at restaurants and all sorts of group living facilities, apartment complexes, retirement homes, campgrounds, trailer parks, what have you, where you've got lots of people putting garbage into dumpsters. If many people are regularly putting garbage into dumpsters and bears are getting into it, you have a chance where you have bears and people coming into close proximity. So someone is putting garbage in 9 o'clock at night, bears happens to be in the dumpster, all of a sudden that person and that bear are feet apart. The bear gets startled, reacts defensively, and the person gets seriously injured. We take advantage of the fact that black bears aren't inherently aggressive towards people, but it's that type of chance encounter where people tend to get injured by black bears. The good news is that these dumpster issues are preventable. Metal top dumpsters are key. Almost all waste disposal companies will provide metal top dumpsters if requested. There is an additional fee for them, but the problems will disappear. I can't tell you how many times we've had issues with dumpsters, major issues over and over and over again. They get a metal top dumpster and it disappears immediately. They still do have to be closed and latched. You know, if a bear can get into the doors are open on the sides. That's obviously not going to solve the problem. They can't be overflowing. So if your dumpster is overflowing, guess what? You need another dumpster, or they need to be emptied more often. You know, simple fixes. So people do need to take some responsibility, but these problems are preventable. As I mentioned before, probably the number one issue that we're having with bears now is interactions with bees and chickens, but really chickens being the driving one. In the past 5 to 10 years, backyard chicken farming has become extraordinarily popular, and even more so during the pandemic, so that they're everywhere now. This figure grossly underestimates the number of chickens that are out there. And remember, this is the bears. And these bears are now coming to backyards, as we said, where they've been trained to go there because of bird feeders. They're encountering chicken coops, and they're breaking into them. This is that young bear that I showed you from several slides back, that young collared female. She became a notorious chicken coop raider. We got tons and tons of calls on her. She learned this behavior. It started by feeding at bird feeders, and then it took advantage of other food sources around people's homes. And you cannot build a chicken coop. I don't care what you say. You cannot build a structural chicken coop that can keep a bear out. Last fall, we found her collar cut off and thrown in a river. Almost certainly, she was raiding someone's chickens and paid with her life for it. So it really is critical. There are consequences for these animals that we all love if they're being fed around our homes. Again, it's this young bear. And really the key here is electric fencing. It does work. It is effective, but there are things you have to do about it. I actually don't recommend the type of fencing you see on the right, those kind of net fencings. They're flimsy. A bear, remember, you're trying to keep out a 500-pound bear, potentially 200-pound bear. They can easily walk down one of those fences. So the goal is to prevent the bears from accessing your hives or your chicken coops. Design and maintain a fence that will do that. A well-built fence, well-maintained fence will protect your resources. And we have resources for you. A couple of years ago, I put together a complete electric fencing guide. It has step-by-step instructions, materials, guides of how you can make it most effective, like baiting the wires. So taking some aluminum foil, put some peanut butter or some bacon grease on it. So you're drawing the bear's nose in right to that wire where it receives the shock. It's going to be most effective there. We're trying to really make a push to get as many people to be using electric fencing as possible. So if you have chickens or bees and aren't using electric fencing, please do so. If you know someone who does, please encourage them to use electric fencing. This guide is available as a PDF on our website. It's a really easy website, mass.gov/bears, and it's available right on that page. There's lots of other preventing conflict with bears materials on that website. Please use it, please share it. And we actually have a new biologist who is working to help us revise some of this. So we're gonna have more materials on here in the near future as well. Because these food sources are why the bear's in your backyard. If you remove that bird feeder, you secure that garbage can, there's zero reason for that bear to be in your backyard. It's gonna move back to natural areas where it can find natural foods. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, if a female is feeding in these places, she's teaching her cubs those same behaviors. And over time, as we saw with that collared bear example, the boldness does increase in time where they go from feeding at the bird feeders to breaking into chicken coops or trying to get into a shed or into a garage to access bird seed. And it often ends badly for the bear. And the more time bears spend around people, the greater chances are of that negative encounter where, the bear's feeding at your bird feeder, you let the dog out, all of a sudden you've got a conflict, you try to rescue your dog, you get mauled. Those types of things, that's when people tend to be hurt by black bears. And again, it's human-associated foods that are the driver of this conflict. These are just bears being bears, but they will take advantage of these foods if they're there, and they're never going to change their behavior. There's nothing you can do to make a bear change their behavior, and so really people must, and I need your help to do that. Again, this is our goal for our population, feeding on natural foods, using natural areas like the Kestrel Land Trust, like our other protected layer areas in the state, but we need your help. If you ever need assistance with bears, again, mass.gov/bears, lots of information there. The environmental police are available 24/7 if there's any kind of an emergency or you need immediate assistance. Or you can call our Belchertown office. That's our regional office for your area, or my office in Westboro. Belchertown, the clerk there is extremely friendly, extremely helpful. She's absolutely fantastic. And the regional biologist there is a former graduate student on the Bear Project. And he's the one who taught me basically everything I know about working with bears in Massachusetts, and a really great guy and really wealth of experience. So please do use those resources if you need assistance. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so very much, Dave. What a wonderful presentation and such a wealth of information regarding these magnificent mammals right here in our state. So as I mentioned in the intro, any questions that you have, if you put them in the chat, some have already been added, and I'll start reviewing those. The first one, Dave, is will electronic fencing work in preventing bears from raiding beehives?
Yep. Yeah. Basically, whether it's a beehive or a chicken coop, really, it is the key. There's a couple other, again, that complete guide is available on our website. You can get all the materials for electric fencing at any Tractor Supply, or basically the same place where you get your feed and your other materials for your livestock. They're relatively easy to install and set up, and they are effective if you build them well.
Okay, good to know. Here's another question. Do bears go after feeders all months and seasons? Maybe you already said that, but let's just reinforce that one.
Yeah, they certainly will. We are kind of approaching maybe the one time of year where you could say it might be safe to have a bird feeder out. The middle winter months, where almost all of our bears are active. That being said, every year we get reports of bears that are remaining active all winter. And that's because the reliable source of food that bird feeders provide kind of preclude that need to hibernate because there's no food. So basically they can go bird feeder to bird feeder and have a reliable source of food all winter. So it's just a couple of years ago, one of that collared female that dens on the UMass campus spent the entire winter active in downtown Amherst, right near the high school, with her 3 one-year-old cubs. Every year we get reports of that happening. So if you put a bird feeder out in the winter months, if you hear about a bear in your area, please take your bird feeders down. If a bear comes to your bird feeder, please take your bird feeders down and don't put them back up.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dave. Marianne is wondering, should we report all bear sightings? If so, to whom?
We don't need to have every sighting. We know that there are bears in your community on a very regular basis, so we don't need to know about every single bear out there. There is a program out of Amherst College that is tracking sightings of bears. So that is Mass Bears. So they certainly would like your sighting information if you wanted to send that to them. Really what we as the state would want to know is if you see something unusual. One of the big issues for bears in the Northeast is mange. We fortunately do not have bears yet with mange in the state, and bears can have hair loss from various things, from just general natural shedding, from lying in a winter den all winter. But indications of what looks like truly like mange, that would certainly be something that we would want to know about. Other types of unusual things, certainly those are things you can report to us, or if you're having conflict and need assistance.
Okay, good to know. Somebody is strongly recommending Ben Goldfarb's book, Crossings, which is about road ecology and wildlife. They said you'll never look at a road in the same way again. Are you familiar with that book, Dave?
I'm not, to be honest, I'm not as up on the current literature and things as I probably should be. I unfortunately just don't have time to delve into it. But there's unquestionably the road network in Massachusetts is a major cause of mortality for bears. in every single other wildlife species we have in the state. In just as developed a landscape as this, roads and vehicle collisions for all wildlife are devastating. And fortunately for a species like bears, it's not as limiting a factor as it is for other species. Certainly, obviously, turtles and other species are far more greatly affected by vehicle strikes than are bears. I mean, obviously, for the individual bear, it's terrible, but certainly, slowing down on your roads, looking for wildlife is certainly helpful.
Okay, good. Do bears have a preferred crossing path or section along the Connecticut River?
Our bears rarely cross the Connecticut River. We have had and we've had a lot of females collared right along the Connecticut River corridor. Actually, no, I'm about to lie to you. We've had 2 bears that have crossed the Connecticut River. That one bear that I showed you from Holyoke crossed on multiple occasions near where the old Mount Tom power plant was. And she did that a couple of times. And we had a bear up in Deerfield that I believe crossed on a railroad track a single time. Other than that, basically, it's a pretty hard barrier for them. We don't often collar males for a couple of different reasons, but we did when I was at UMass put a couple of GPS collars on some very large males. And during the mating season, they'll make huge movements. And one captured in the Quabbin, crossed the Connecticut River, went to Northampton, made a loop back. So those larger males during the mating season will make some of those movements.
Okay. Somebody is wondering if Mass Wildlife still transfers bears to their neighborhood, which is the Fitzgerald Lake area in Northampton.
It is very, very, very rare that we are moving bears. I think historically, as bears were first getting more established into suburban areas, the state was much quicker to relocate bears. Now, the only bears that we're relocating are bears that are in like downtown somewhere. So, one was at the courthouse last year in Northampton, right down at the main intersection. That animal was tranquilized and moved. The bears that are in Fitzgerald Lake, quite frankly, are resident there. We've trapped there in the past, and we can catch a dozen bears, new bears, anytime we trap in the Fitzgerald Lake area. And if we were to go back the next year, we'll catch another 12 bears. So really, really high densities of bears on the edge of Northampton there. And almost all of them that we've had collared in that area use Fitzgerald Lake in that area for a portion of their for their home range.
Can handling cubs, even for a short period of time, make them less fearful of humans?
There's no indication of that. These types of studies that we're doing are conducted pretty much throughout bear range. And so we've handled in the state probably thousands of bear cubs at this point. And there's no indication that any of those cubs develop any kind of different behaviors than any other bears.
Okay.
And you have to keep in mind that those cubs are literally 6 to 8 weeks old when that's happening. It's very brief level of interaction, and beyond that, they don't have any. We don't frequently walk in on them, or we basically let them do their thing after that.
Okay, good to know. Can any of the information on specific tagged bears be shared with those of us who live near them?
We do not give out the data. And the big reason for that is, one, we don't want the bears to be harassed by people who go out and are looking for the bears, as can happen with our wildlife if people kind of know where to look for it, or different places that those bears are hunting. But also, these bears are hunted in Massachusetts. And so because there's a hunting season, in reality, that data is essentially a roadmap of where to find those bears. And so while it provides important information to us, if one of our bears is taken in the hunting season, that's obviously how we learn about the causes of survival, their causes of mortality, the survival rates that we have. We obviously don't want to put our research animals, though, at a greater risk for being taken in the hunting season than any other bear. So that's the big reason why we don't make that information public.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Do bears get stung when they are eating bees and wasps and nests, and does it bother them if so?
Yep, they definitely get stung if they're getting into those, but they are, they're tough critters. They will, I talked about baiting the electric fencing. Bear. The reason you do that is because if a bear takes the electric fencing perhaps across their chest or something, they might walk right through it. You really want to draw it right to their nose. So they can deal with quite a lot of pain and discomfort to access a food reward, and that's what they do when they're getting honey. But you'll see videos occasionally of a bear getting into beehives where they'll do it for a while, but clearly they're being stung and they'll swat them off and eventually run away in some instances. So they absolutely feel it, but they're far tougher than we are, so much more readily able to deal with that.
When bears forage on opportunistic deer kills, does lead ammunition affect them and or their cubs?
Yep. Not not likely. And we certainly don't have any indication that any of our bears are doing that enough that it's causing any kind of issues. In reality, for the most part, it is the gut piles that are left in the woods that they would be scavenging on, and we certainly don't. I'm not aware of any information out there that bears are at all affected by that.
Okay. What is the correct term for an adult male bear?
A boar.
A boar. Okay.
Male is a boar and a female is a sow.
Okay. Mhm. Let's see. What advice would you give to a young person hoping to find their way into the field? Does Mass Wildlife have internships working with bears?
I get a lot of requests. Unfortunately, I'm not able to accommodate those very often. In reality, I would say spend time outdoors. That's basically how I got into wildlife late, but I had spent my entire youth outdoors. So I was a wildlife person already. I did backpacking in various parts of the country and hiking. Get outdoors, learn your local wildlife. That hands-on information that you'll learn from just being out there, being in different types of forest, are going to paint a complete picture that then if you go to college and you're taking classes, you actually like, oh yeah, I've seen that here, here, and here, and it builds that knowledge base that you have. Certainly, I would go to a college or a university that has a wildlife program and take those classes. And then when you're there, it's trying to get experience. So the technician experience that you can get working summer jobs where you're working on research projects is what's going to make you potentially employable. It's going to what's going to allow you to get into graduate school if you decide to do that, or a wildlife related job if you have those experiences. It's also going to teach you whether or not you like it. A lot of people say I love bears or I love wildlife, but do you like being out in the rain, the cold, mosquitoes, those type of things? So until you've done field work, you might not know whether or not you really want to do that.
Good advice. Here's a question. If we come across an injured bear, either in our own backyard or in our communities, who should we contact?
Yep. So in reality, it's going to be if you see it in your yard or see it somewhere, give the animal space. Obviously that is an injured animal. An injured animal likely can be less predictable in their behavior than potentially a healthy animal that because it is likely suffering. Every year we get reports of bears walking around with serious limps. Almost in most certainty, most of those are involved in vehicle collisions that sustain a fractured leg or something. Unfortunately, there is very little that we can do for them. We always get requests like, can this bear be rehabbed or what have you? Unfortunately, it's impossible to rehabilitate a large bear. In a couple of instances, we have had bear cubs that have like newborn cubs of the year that have had injuries that we will take them to Tufts Wildlife Clinic and they've performed surgeries on them. But larger bears, it's just impossible to keep them quiet, to have facilities where where they can be taken. So in reality, there's not much that can be done. If the injury would happen to be severe enough, in some circumstances, the best thing may be to euthanize or put the animal down to prevent them from suffering. But animals with injuries can deal with them. We will get reports of an area of a bear with a limp for years. One of our collared females in your area, Belchertown and up into Pelham, we have had her collared since 2010 or 2011. Her hind leg is shattered, and it has been since we first captured her. She's raised successfully litters of 4 and 3 cubs. You wouldn't know from her movement data that she has any kind of injury. So again, these are very strong animals that are capable of dealing with some pretty massive injuries and surviving and doing just fine.
Good to know. Andrea's wondering, why are males not tracked with collars?
It's really due to that that size and that growth potential that I talked about before. One, if we were to collar a young male, it can go from 120 pounds to over 400 pounds in 2 years. And so the growth they're now going to outgrow that collar so quickly that if you're not handling it on a very regular basis, you run a serious risk of that collar causing injury. Additionally, so larger males, unfortunately, their necks are so large that it's very difficult to keep collars on them. For females, if you fit the collar to her skull just in front of her ears, once you slip that over her head, there's lots of room around her neck for that collar, but it can't fall off easily. The male, it's not as easily done. So, in reality, we don't need to know about males. The females are really the critical part because they're producing the cubs. It's really monitoring, and a single male can mate with multiple females in an area. Really, it's knowing what's happening with the females that provides the critical information for knowing what's happening with our population.
Makes sense, Dave. Let's see. Andrea's wondering, or Leslie, where are we here? What should we do to stay safe if we see a bear while in our backyard or while walking in the woods? They live near Fitzgerald Lake.
Just give them space. If they're in your backyard, I wouldn't go out there right away. If people call us about conflict with coyotes, and I'll say, all right, go out into your yard and physically chase that thing off. Drive it into the woods and get out there. I don't make those recommendations with bears where I don't want you going out and yelling at the bear, trying to make noise. Give it space and it will move on. If you're out in the woods and you're hiking or something, you encounter a bear on a trail, just make some noise. The big thing is just so that you don't startle them. So if you see them 100 yards off, just, raise your arm, say, hey bear, I'm over here. You just keep going about your thing. I'm just going to back up and give you more space now. So keep your eyes on the bear so you know what it's doing. Slowly back up, give it some more space and get out of the area. If someone is afraid to go out and recreate because of the presence of bears, and we get that quite often, you can carry bear spray. It's basically pepper spray that's designed to propel grizzly bears or brown bears, a much larger, much more aggressive bears, and basically it puts out a cloud of pepper spray out to about 20 or 30 feet. You can wear it in a little holster on your belt, and so it's right there. Should you encounter a bear at close range, you've got something you can pull out and you can spray. I see that someone popping up real fast asking if it was illegal. It was illegal. That was changed in the last half dozen years or so. So it is now legal to possess in Massachusetts. You may still, in some instances, have some difficulty getting companies to ship it to Massachusetts because of that past restriction on it. But it's available sometimes in gun shops or places like Cabela's or other hunting shops. I'd recommend calling first to just say, hey, do you guys carry this? And just rather than running out and going shopping for it. But that's something that you can just have as, insurance should you be out there. But also keep in mind that people are recreating all over Massachusetts every single day. They're biking, they're walking their dogs, they're jogging, they're, hiking, what have you, in our forests, in all these places where we have these high densities of bears without serious encounters.
That is reassuring. Let's see. The gun rack in Turner's has bear spray, someone mentioned. I think I've gotten to all the questions in the chat. If there are any that I've missed, or if there are any others that are coming to mind. We have about 10 or 15 more minutes. So any last questions for Dave? It's amazing how much you know about bears, Dave. Somebody did express appreciation here in the chat. Let's see, the compost issues. Let's see, Karen. There was a compost question. Let's see here.
I may have seen that before come across. I think they were asking if there was a any bear-proof compost containers. I think the big thing there is just containing it. I mean, so those. I think you're all familiar with those kind of the black little containers that you can turn over. We don't tend to get a ton of reports of bears in compost. In reality, they certainly will get into it. But the one call I recall having, it was someone who was putting chicken bones in their compost. So if you're just putting vegetable matter and that type of thing, you probably won't have any issues with bears. I just wouldn't recommend putting meat products in your compost, and you should be okay. I don't know of a specific. I mean, there are tons and tons of bear-proof garbage cans that are out there. So you just Google bear-proof garbage cans. Those are very plentiful. I have to imagine that some of those same companies have built, bear-proof or bear-resistant compost containers. I just am not aware of one immediately off the top of my head.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Any other questions for Dave? We're getting lots of appreciation for your presentation, Dave. Okay, let's see. We are living with bears in the neighborhood every day here and where? Near the Quabbin. Oh, thanks,
Yep.
Kim.
Yeah, as you saw from those figures, it's these bears are they're right in next to your homes and your neighborhoods, and it's just taking a couple quick precautions that can reduce their presence. Unfortunately, you can be dependent on what your neighbors are doing too. So the more people that embrace this message and take it seriously, the better off you as a community are going to be, and the bears are going to be, quite frankly. But they are there. There's no question that they are in and amongst us. I think it's important just to remember that they are a large, powerful animal. As I said, give them space when you do see them and encounter them, but enjoy them too. I mean, that's the thing. I think almost everyone here probably does. That's why you're at the presentation. It's a great success story that bears and our other wildlife are thriving here in the state, and it's something we as wildlife managers, you as conservation-minded folks, should be proud of.
Dave, I heard that black bears can run up to about 25 miles per hour, and twice when driving on Route 91 in Vermont, I've had a bear dash in front of my vehicle, and it's amazing how fast they're running. And I just am thankful that I wasn't going a little faster, because boy, yeah, they're large, but yeah, it's about 25 miles an hour approximately.
I don't know the exact speed, but you can't outrun one. And I've seen a brown bear running before, and it blew me away at how fast it was. It just absolutely took off like a shot, and it is amazing that an animal that large can move that quickly, and they really can. So, yep, very impressive.
And yeah, again, thank you for the good work that you're doing for the bears and for our state, Dave. And stay tuned, folks, for other online presentations in this Conservation Action for Biodiversity online speaker series, as well as other upcoming events.
Thank you, everyone. Glad you all enjoyed it. Take care.
Good night, everybody.